You got dressed this morning without thinking about it. A shirt, maybe a jacket. You didn't consider why. You just did it the same way you brush your teeth or lock the door. But the real answer is far stranger than habit. It reaches back further than cities, further than farming, further than language as you know it. It reaches back to a version of you that was losing a war with the cold. Start with the body itself. Your skin is nearly hairless compared to almost every other mammal on the planet. That wasn't always useful. For most of human history, a bare-skinned primate walking through an ice age should not have survived. So something had to change. Something had to cover what evolution left exposed. That something was clothing, and it did not arrive when you might expect. For a long time, researchers assumed clothing was old. Ancient, as old as fire, maybe older. But there was no way to date fabric that had rotted away hundreds of thousands of years ago. Cloth doesn't fossilize. Skins don't survive ice ages intact. So how do you date an invention that leaves almost no trace? The answer came from something you'd never expect to find in a research paper about clothing. Because in 2003, biologist Mark Stoneking and his colleague Ralph Kittler ran a genetic analysis on human body lice. Not head lice. Body lice are a different species entirely. And here's the strange part. Body lice can only survive in clothing. They lay their eggs in fabric seams. Without clothes, they die out within days. So if you can figure out when body lice diverge from head lice as a separate species, you can figure out almost exactly when humans started wearing something regularly enough for a new insect to evolve around it. Their answer stunned people. Somewhere between 83,000 and 170,000 years ago. Not millions of years. Not even close to when modern humans first appeared. This means for an enormous stretch of human history, your ancestors walked around with nothing but skin. No hides, no doubts, nothing. So what changed? Anthropologist Ian Gilligan has spent years trying to answer that. His research points somewhere unexpected. Clothing wasn't invented for modesty. It wasn't invented for status. It was invented for survival against a climate your body could no longer handle alone. Around 180,000 years ago, the planet entered one of its coldest stretches. Ice sheets crept further from the poles than they had in a long time. Temperatures in parts of Africa and Eurasia dropped hard enough that even well-adapted humans would have struggled through the night. Gilligan's research suggests this cold pressure is what pushed early humans to start wrapping animal hides around their bodies, not as fashion, but as insulation. A second skin, borrowed from something that had already died in the cold so you didn't have to. Think about what that actually required. It wasn't as simple as draping a hide over your shoulders. Early humans needed tools to scrape fat and flesh from skins. They needed a way to soften stiff hide into something wearable. Archaeologists have found bone tools dating back roughly 90,000 years in caves in Morocco that show exactly the kind of wear pattern you'd expect from scraping and softening leather. Not decorative, functional. Someone was making something to wear, and they were doing it with real skill. But here's where the story gets stranger. Somewhere around 30,000 to 40,000 years later, clothing shifted again. Archaeologist Olga Soffer studied a set of small carved figurines from Eastern Europe, often called Venus figurines, dated to roughly 27,000 years ago. On close inspection, several of these figures aren't shown nude. They're wearing something. A buem capitul, a twisted string skirt, patterns that mirror actual textile weaves, not just carved decoration. That's remarkable because it means somewhere in that gap, clothing stopped being just a hide thrown over the body. It became constructed. Fibers twisted into thread. Thread turned into cloth. A completely different technology layered on top of the first. So notice what actually happened here. Clothing wasn't one invention. It was two, separated by tens of thousands of years. First, the desperate wrap of an animal hide to survive a freezing night. Then, much later, the deliberate construction of fitted, woven material. One was survival. The other was engineering. And once humans had that second kind of clothing, something else became possible. Migration. Your ancestors did not spread into Siberia, into the Arctic Circle, into the coldest parts of the Northern Hemisphere by adapting their bodies. There wasn't time for that kind of biological change. They spread by adapting their coverings instead. Fitted clothing, sewn rather than wrapped, is part of what allowed humans to push into environments that should have killed them within hours. Some researchers argue that eyed needles, dated to around 40,000 years ago in sites across Siberia and Europe, mark the real turning point. A needle means seams. Seams mean fitted garments. Fitted garments mean insulation efficient enough to survive temperatures that loose hides never could. Compare that to Neanderthals, who lived through many of the same ice ages. Evidence suggests their clothing stayed simpler for far longer, closer to draped hides than tailored garments. Some researchers have proposed this difference in clothing technology may have played a role in which of these two human species expanded further and endured longer through the coldest periods. Not intelligence in some abstract sense. A very specific kind of technical innovation sewn directly onto the body. So think about that shirt you put on without thinking this morning. It carries the memory of two completely different survival stories stitched together across tens of thousands of years. Somewhere in you is the memory of a hide thrown over freezing shoulders in a cave, and somewhere in you is the memory of a needle pulling twisted fiber through fitted seams so an ancestor of yours could walk into a colder world than any human had walked into before. Why does this matter now, in a climate-controlled room, in a shirt made in a factory you'll never see? Because the instinct never left. You still reach for a jacket the moment the temperature drops, without calculating anything. That reflex is not new. It is not modern. It is closer to 170,000 years old, wired into you the same way hunger or thirst is wired into you. Clothing didn't just protect your ancestors from a cold. It became so essential to survival that the need for it is now built into how you experience temperature itself. There's something almost humbling in that. You think of clothing as culture, as identity, as fashion, as expression, as something you chose this morning based on how you wanted to be seen. And all of that is true. But underneath every choice is a far older decision, made by someone who was cold and scared and clever enough to reach for the skin of an animal that had already given up its warmth to the same freezing night. You got dressed this morning without thinking about it, and that's exactly the point. The real answer was never in the fabric. It was in the fact that you didn't have to think at all.